Although XHTML has many meaningful tags, it doesn't have enough to convey all of the meaning we're trying to convey in our code. The one advantage about XML, for example, is that if I need a tag to describe my trips, I can just make one. In XHTML, we have a fixed set of meaningful tags to work from. There is no header, footer, or photo gallery tags, even if I have those elements on my page. To pass along additional meaning, we can use the class and ID attributes to provide more information about specific content. While similar in functionality, ID and classes have different rules about when and how they can be used. IDs can only be used once per page and are usually used to define unique areas of content. Although any element can have an ID attribute, they are most commonly used to give additional meaning to the generic div tag. Classes can be used as often as desired on a page and are generally used to identify information that could repeat on the page but aren't tied to any specific element type. In this exercise, we'll take our previously structured file and add additional meaning to it by using IDs and classes. We'll see how Dreamweaver makes this very easy to do, even if we didn't add these attributes originally. So I'm working in our structure file, and we've got the div structure that we assigned in the last exercise, but now we need to give those guys a little bit more meaning. Now, there are a couple of different ways that you can do IDs, and let's take a look at some of those. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click inside the first element. I am the page's main heading. If I notice down in the tag selector, I can click on the div tag and it selects that. In the properties inspector, now I get a section right here where I can assign an ID for that div. Now, if I have an attached style sheet, I could go ahead and grab that from the pull down menu, but of course I don't. So I'm just going to type in header and hit return. Now, take a look at the tag selector right down here. Do you see where it says div pound header? So anytime you see that pound symbol, that's an ID of that particular element. If you were to look in code view, and I'm just going to switch over to split screen view, you can see that it says div ID equals header. So Dreamweaver just went ahead and added that for us. Now, if you're the type of person that really likes to hand code a little bit more than you like using the properties inspector, let me show you a couple of different ways that you can approach adding IDs. One of the things I can do, I'm going to go ahead and click in the div below our main div. And I'll use the tag selector to select that div tag, is there's something that we call the quick tag editor. I'm a big fan of this. If you select an element and use the Command or Control T keyboard shortcut, that's going to bring up a quick tag editor that lets you edit and hand code here in Design View. So notice that it brings up my div tag, and I can simply type in ID, hit return, and it'll finish the equals and the quotation marks. And in this case, we're going to type in content. So now we've applied that ID. And if I switch over to code view, you can see where that says div ID equals content. Now, if you really like to hand code, you can simply do just that. I can click on line 18 and another div tag that I have here, and this one is my sidebar, and here I can just type in ID equals sidebar. Whenever you're doing code hinting, if you already had some CSS styles attached that had ID selectors in it, you would be able to choose those from a list. Since we don't have any of those, we have to manually type those in. So I'm going to go back to Design View, and I'm going to finish up assigning IDs by assigning the footer ID. And you can use your favorite way of doing this. I really do, if I'm in Design View, love to use the Property Inspector because it's just so easy to click inside there and type in the word footer and hit return. Now, a little information about naming conventions for IDs. You don't want any spaces. You don't want to begin it with a number, and try to avoid using punctuation. Other than that, you can use pretty much anything that you want to do. Okay, now the next thing we need to do, we're done assigning all of our IDs, so these structural div elements now pass along a little bit more meaning about the content inside of them. This is our header region, this is our content region, this is our sidebar region, and all these different user agents that might consume your content will at least know that much about this area. Later on, when we start working with CSS, we can use that information to help us style that area and do layout as well. So we get a lot of benefit from using IDs and classes. Now, speaking of classes, that's what we have to do next. What we want to do is we want to make sure that the word independent sort of stands out and is identified everywhere it appears in the content. You can see, as a matter of fact, this line is telling us to do just that. The word independent needs to be identified everywhere it appears in my content, something I can't currently do even though I can emphasize certain text or make it stand out from the text around it. Now, what does that mean? Well, if I click inside the emphasize word, I can see that it's using an EM tag to surround the text. If I click in stand out, I see that it's using strong. These two tags are now used instead of the bold and italics tag. The EM tag stands for emphasized text. The strong tag stands for strongly emphasized text. So although they do help us convey a little bit of meaning, they don't actually identify the content inside of it. So I'm going to go in and highlight the word independent where it's found within that sentence. Now, in this case, if I do the quick tag editor, remember it's a Control or Command T. Since this isn't one specific element selected, it says, oh, you want to wrap this with a tag. One of the best ways of identifying content is to use the generic inline level tag, the span tag. The way that the div tag gives us a generic block level element, the span tag gives us a generic inline level element. So I'm just going to use code hinting to find the span tag, and then I'm going to pass along a class attribute. So right after span, I'm going to hit space and type in class. And then the class we're going to give this is independent. Hit return. Now, I need to do that everywhere this is found. I could use find and replace to do that, and that would be pretty easy. But we really don't have that many, so I'm just going to go ahead and highlight that word wherever I find it, and I'm going to do pretty much the same thing. Command or Control T, span, class equals independent. And I notice I have one more area that has independent, so I'm going to highlight that one more time. Command or Control T, span, class equals independent. Code hinting can really help us out with that. Now, again, if I look in code view, I can see that that class has been applied now in multiple locations. So we're using the class independent multiple times on the page, but all the IDs we're only using it once. Now, one more thing that passing along this additional meaning allows us to do code-wise is to sort of equalize our tags, if you will. Let me switch back to design view and explain this a little further. If I click inside I am the page's main heading, that's an H1 tag. And if I click inside I am the main content heading, that's an H2 tag. Well, it was done that way before because the page's main heading was more important than the main content heading. So the H1 was used and then the H2 was used. Well, now that they're in separate regions, I can pass along that meaning in other ways. This is the heading's main headline and this is the content's main headline. So I'm going to give these guys an equal standing now and click inside I'm the main content heading and change that to an H1 tag. I do that by going down to the Properties Inspector and clicking on the HTML tab. I'm going to click inside that heading, and then using the Format pull-down menu, I'm going to choose an H1. Now, it's exactly the same size, but again, we don't worry about presentation right now. We can control that through CSS. At the moment, we now have a main headline inside the heading. We also have a main headline inside the content. Which one we make more important is going to be up to us. So our content now has meaningful structure that allows any user agent accessing the code to interpret the code and display it based on the structure. The important point now is that we use this structure consistently across our entire site. This isn't to say that every page on our site has to be structured exactly the same way. We just need to follow the rules that we've established site-wide. Not only does this keep your code structure consistent, it makes writing the eventual CSS much easier. Now that we've covered structuring our XHTML properly, we need to examine how to control the presentation of that code with CSS.